Have you ever been called lazy? Not just in a joking way, but in a way that made you feel like something was wrong with you? Like you had all these big dreams and ideas in your head, but you just didn't fit into the usual hustle? What if I told you that what people call laziness might be one of the most powerful signs of a unique type of mind? The famous psychologist Carl Jung spent over a decade studying people who were labeled this way. He wasn't looking at criminals or rebels. He was fascinated by those quiet individuals who seemed to do nothing, yet secretly harbored ambitions to change everything. And what he discovered didn't just surprise him. It shattered everything psychologists thought they knew about human potential. Jung found a pattern that he couldn't ignore. Case after case, he met people who frustrated everyone around them. They couldn't stick to basic productivity systems. They seemed unmotivated by regular rewards. But in conversation, their insights were breathtaking. They could see solutions others missed, understand hidden connections, and imagine possibilities that seemed impossible. Their minds were like vast, humming libraries, but their bodies were still. They possessed what I like to call effortless depth. Society looks at the still body and assumes the library is empty. But Jung realized something crucial. These people weren't broken. They weren't lacking motivation. In fact, they were accessing something that our frantic hustle culture actively destroys in most of us. They were operating on a different frequency. While everyone else was busy building, they were quietly tuning into the blueprint. This is where it gets really interesting. Jung discovered that what we call lazy geniuses are actually what he defined as visionary creators. He said there are two types of creative people. First, there's the psychological artist who creates from their own personal, conscious experiences, their memories, their pain, their joy. Then, there's the visionary. The visionary is different. They act less like a painter and more like a radio receiver. They don't just generate ideas from their own small story. Instead, they serve as a vessel. They tune into something much bigger, what Jung called the collective unconscious. Think of it as a shared library of all human knowledge, patterns, and archetypes that exist beneath our personal minds. It's the source of our deepest myths, symbols, and universal stories. The lazy genius falls squarely into this second category. Their best ideas don't feel like they're making them up. It feels like they're receiving them. That feeling when an idea just pops into your head during a shower or a walk. That's not random. Jung believed true, revolutionary creativity often comes not from our conscious, struggling ego, but from these deep, unconscious levels. So what looks like laziness, staring out the window, daydreaming, taking long walks, is actually the mind creating the perfect, quiet conditions for what Jung called a spontaneous overflow. It's allowing the signals from that vast collective library to come through clearly, without the static of forced effort. They aren't forcing conscious thought. They're allowing unconscious processes to unfold naturally. This explains why their biggest ideas come during activities others see as unproductive. They're not being lazy. They're doing the vital work of listening. But here's what the productivity gurus don't want you to know, and it gets controversial. Jung realized that these visionary minds prove our productivity-obsessed culture isn't just unnecessary for them. It can be actively harmful. If the most genuine insights come from unconscious processing, not from grinding willpower, then everything society teaches us about achievement gets flipped on its head. The lazy genius is living proof that the hardest workers aren't always the most valuable thinkers. This creates what I call productivity anxiety in others, that uneasy feeling that their constant busyness might be less effective than someone else's apparent stillness. The productive person often fears the visionary because they demonstrate that a single moment of effortless insight can be worth more than weeks of strained labor. It threatens the very foundation of their identity, which is built on doing. But Jung found something even more profound than this social fear. He discovered that these individuals weren't just thinking differently. They were accessing a form of collective intelligence. So, how do you know if you have this visionary mind? Jung discovered something so simple, yet so revealing, that it acts like a mirror for your consciousness. It's not a complicated exam. It's a test of stillness. Here's what you do. Find a quiet space. Set a timer for just 5 minutes. Sit comfortably, and then do nothing. No phone, no music, no distractions. Your only task is to observe what happens in your own mind. Don't try to control it. Just watch. Jung documented 2 very different reactions to this test, and they tell you everything. The first reaction is the visionary response. For the so-called lazy genius, something remarkable happens. After the initial noise settles, ideas, solutions, or sudden understandings begin to bubble up naturally. The mind starts making connections on its own, effortlessly. The silence isn't empty, it's fertile. It's the sound of the connection being established. The second reaction is the productive person's response. For someone deeply identified with constant action, these 5 minutes become agonizing. Anxiety builds. An internal voice screams that this is a waste of time. There's a compulsive need to do something, to check a box, to be useful. The silence feels threatening and deeply uncomfortable. This simple test reveals a fundamental wiring difference. The visionary mind uses stillness as fuel. The productivity-oriented mind sees stillness as an enemy. Jung realized that the lazy genius has an unusual and natural connection to that collective unconscious we talked about. It's as if they have a stronger signal or a better antenna. They seem to download solutions and patterns from sources beyond their personal experience. It's astonishing when you think about it. They can know things they never formally studied. They can see patterns in fields they've never worked in. They understand complex systems intuitively, without having to analyze every single part. It's not magic. It's a different mode of processing information. They're thinking with a human mind, not just their own. But why does society react to these people with such confusion and sometimes even hostility? Jung dug into this and found a disturbing truth. The modern cult of productivity is built on one fundamental belief, that a person's worth comes from measurable output. Your value is your results, your hustle, your visible busyness. The visionary, the lazy genius, threatens this entire system. They demonstrate that the most valuable contributions often come from completely immeasurable processes, from silence, from dreams, from idle time. They embody what I call the shadow of productivity, inspired by Jung's work on shadows. They represent society's unconscious fear that maybe, just maybe, a person's value isn't determined by how busy they appear. This fear explains the labels: lazy, unfocused, a dreamer. These aren't just descriptions, they're defenses. They're a way for the productivity system to dismiss what it cannot understand and control. But the historical evidence for Jung's theory is undeniable, and it's everywhere you look. History itself is the greatest testament to Jung's discovery. Look back, and you'll find that some of the most world-changing thinkers were constantly labeled as lazy, impractical, or procrastinators by the standards of their time. They weren't failing the system. They were operating outside of it. Take Albert Einstein. As a young clerk, he was criticized for spending hours staring into space, lost in thought, instead of focusing on his paperwork. Those lazy daydreams were the birthplace of the theory of relativity. Ideas that came not from frantic study, but from what he called thought experiments in the quiet of his own mind. Consider Nikola Tesla. He was seen as impractical because he preferred to build and test his inventions entirely in his imagination before ever touching a tool. His method of intense visualization, which looked like inactivity to others, led to breakthroughs in electrical engineering that seemed like magic. Or Charles Darwin. He was famously slow, taking decades to publish his theory of evolution. He was mocked for his procrastination. But that wasn't laziness. That was a deep, unconscious processing period, a long gestation ensuring his idea was robust enough to withstand the criticism he knew it would face. The pattern is clear. Jung precisely documented how this process works through his theory of creativity as a play instinct. He wrote that true creation comes not from the intellect, but from a play instinct acting out of inner necessity. This is the core Jungian principle that explains the behavior of lazy geniuses. What society calls laziness is actually Jung's play instinct, the mind's natural creative mechanism that works through fantasy and imagination, not forced intellectual effort. The documented process has 3 stages. First, conscious effort retreats, creating space. Then, fantasy and imagination become the raw material. Finally, the person acts as a translator, turning these deep archetypal images into practical applications. This feels effortless because it's driven by an inner necessity, not external pressure. Jung emphasized that this play instinct can't be scheduled or optimized. It flows from autonomous rhythms, not from the demands of a productivity calendar. But the implications of Jung's discovery go far beyond individual success stories. The most revolutionary part of his finding was this: visionary creators perform a crucial evolutionary function for humanity. They preserve and cultivate collective intelligence, while everyone else is focused on individual output. I call this Jung's collective intelligence theory. It suggests human consciousness has layers. Most people operate on the surface level of individual, linear thinking. The lazy genius naturally taps into deeper collective layers, where the accumulated wisdom and patterns of humanity are stored. While productive people work within existing systems, lazy geniuses receive knowledge that transcends current limits. Their apparent idleness is actually consciousness operating on a collective, not just an individual level. In my view, based on Jung's work, the lazy genius thinks with the human mind. Their ideas serve collective evolution, not just personal advancement. This is why their ideas often feel radically ahead of their time. They're tapping into archetypal patterns that represent humanity's deepest potential, unfiltered by current cultural constraints. So where does this leave you? If this resonates, you face a fundamental challenge Jung identified: how to bring these deep ideas into a world that demands constant, visible productivity. I call this the integration paradox. You must stay connected to your unconscious processing while consciously engaging with society. Too much social activity breaks the connection, but too little prevents your ideas from reaching others. Jung suggested strategies for this. First, protect your rhythm. Recognize your natural energy cycles. Maybe you're useless at 9 a.m., but brilliant at midnight, and defend them fiercely, even when society pushes standard schedules. This is non-negotiable. Second, practice selective collaboration. Don't try to work with everyone. Find a rare few who appreciate unconventional approaches, a practical builder who respects your vision, or a mentor who sees your depth. Your tribe is small, but powerful. Third, develop translation skills. Learn to clothe your unconscious, archetypal insights in simple, clear language. Practice explaining your big idea in 3 sentences. This builds the bridge between your world and theirs. To help you identify your own patterns, here are what I call Jung's internal signs. See if they fit. First, productivity anxiety. Standard productivity advice stresses you out more than it helps. You feel you're fighting your own nature. Second, insight emergence. Your best ideas come during unproductive activities, showers, walks, daydreaming. Third, unpredictable energy. Your productive bursts don't fit a normal schedule. Fourth, unproven certainty. You believe in ideas others find unrealistic, not because you have proof, but because they feel true on a level deeper than logic. But the final and most important revelation ties it all together. Jung's research showed that visionaries pay a price. The connection to the creative unconscious often comes with social isolation or psychological strain, because you're channeling content that doesn't fit into neat social boxes. You are, in Jung's words, speaking to the temporal world from the eternal world. This is the burden of a genius. You're trying to connect two different levels of consciousness. The visionary operates from universal, timeless perspectives, while society demands timely, individual output. You're not lazy. You're a mediator, and you cannot simply switch this connection off, even if it makes you seem different or impractical. Jung ultimately believed that visionaries who stay true to their authentic development, despite social pressure, become the pioneers. They're the bridges between humanity's current limits and its archetypal potential. Your patience, though the recognition may take decades, serves the collective advancement to higher levels of consciousness. The evidence for his prediction is already here. Modern neuroscience shows that breakthrough insights happen during activation of the default mode network, the brain state lazy geniuses access in downtime. As AI handles routine tasks, human value shifts toward precisely this type of creative insight. Remote work and flexible schedules are creating a world where your natural rhythm can finally be recognized. Jung saw the future belonging to those who can access intelligence beyond individual thinking. And you've maintained that access while society is just learning to value what it long ignored. So, remember the shocking discovery. The most feared person in society isn't the rebel. It's the one called lazy, who secretly dreams of changing the world. Your so-called laziness is not a character flaw. It is your connection to what Jung identified as humanity's deepest creative source. And that connection might be exactly what the world needs for its next leap forward. If this revelation about Jung's visionary theory resonates with you, then the journey is just beginning. The question is, will you trust your process before the rest of the world catches up to what Jung knew decades ago?